I can use one of these other ones or come up with something different on my own called phrasing and then leave a comment. And then when I go over to look at all of my comments, I can see everything. But I think sometimes with comments, the problem is you get a lot of them and they just become overwhelming. So we've added some ways to sort them where, for instance, you can say, I just want to see the tags about, phrasing. And then you can just see those and deal with those. So you can kind of break up your revision process into stages, doing, whichever ones that you want. And of course, because we're a collaborative app and, it's easy to share and add people, like I got Bill Shakespeare helping me out today. When you leave comments, you can at people. So you're going to go at, Bill Shakespeare, and then he will be notified when I say like, hey, take a look at this sentence. Yeah, so that is super helpful. And you can also see your comments by section. If you go over to the contents, you can see all like your chapters or however you have it laid out, and you can look at your comments this way and sort of use it as a revision checklist as you go through and revise the comments, once you're done with them. So yeah, a lot of great ways for you to revise your work using the comments features. And that is today's tasty slice of ButterDocs.
All right, short and sweet.
Yeah.
A few handy things. We're happy to, later on in the show, if you have questions about ButterDocs, if you want to learn a little bit more about, revising and using comments or just working with other people, you can ask them some questions. We can do some more demoing later on in the show. But no, we're very excited to welcome DeVoe and Danica onto the stage. I'm going to pass it over to Micah to take over the discussion.
Awesome. DeVoe and Danica, thank you so much for joining us today. How are you both doing?
Fantastic.
Good. It's freezing here.
You're in
super envious of your East Coast weather.
Yes. No. Yeah. It's like fall. We miss out a little bit. I feel like in California, it's like the leaves aren't changing as much. You get like 3 crisp mornings. I was in New York in October, like walking around Brooklyn, and I'm just like, oh, this is just feels so cozy. I was very actually inspired to write in that weather. I just started working on a new project, like on vacation. I was writing in the train, on the train, and like on the bus, and it was actually pretty fantastic. But yeah, thank you so much for joining us. So we have DeVoe, who is an author and founder of Pen Parentis, a writing community for parents, and Danica Bloom, an author and a romance author coach at Author Ever After. So excited to have both of you with us today. Why don't we start by you guys just sharing a little bit about what you write and how you help working with other writers. And do you want to start? Can you hear me, Em? Sorry. No?
Oh, I was just getting real garble, so I don't know if that garbled, but
Danica,
I think you said introduce yourself.
Yeah, am I still garbled? Danica, am I garbled?
No, Danica, did you hear what he said?
Yes.
I will start while you figure out your sound.
And then I'll copy.
I write steamy romance as Danica Bloom, and I've got 5 novels, a few novellas, some low content, all indie published, and I also have another persona where I write nonfiction books that support authors as Donna Barker. So those are my two hats. I wear a tiara as Danica, and I also have a community, as you said, called Author Ever After, where I support pre-published and early career romance writers to first get published and then launch their writing careers.
Awesome.
Fantastic.
I'm super into all communities.
Yeah.
Hi. So I'm DeVoe, and I'm talking over Micah. Micah, did you want to talk?
Go for it.
So I'm DeVoe. Hi, Viewerland. Hi, people in Ohio or wherever you are. But I write very weird fiction, and my first collection is right there. It's the one with the weird cover. And it's called A Flash of Darkness. And it is all short stories. They are Black Mirror, Twilight Zone, super strange. Somebody called me Femme Kafka. I was into it. Somebody else said I was like Shirley Jackson, which I was like, what? Shh, don't tell anybody. That's so exciting. So I do love writing fiction. And like Danica, I also have 2 hats. I also love hats. And my other hat is as the founder of Pen Parentis. I'm also the ED, and we help writers stay creative after they have kids. So we present salons, we have an annual fellowship, and we have online meetups where you can set goals and have a group that actually cares whether or not you finish that, paragraph or poem or screenplay or whatever you're writing. We're there to help you get it done, and without actually abandoning your children in the process. So
whereas in my community, we do the opposite. We're like, put the kids on a tablet and just come sit with us.
That is one of the tricks. You can do it that way. There are other ways, but that is perfectly valid. Whatever. If you have a deadline, you have to. But yeah, so we're here to sort of lift the guilt of having to work, or wanting to work for that matter. But and I also have a book out called Book and Baby, which is really hard to find, but you can find it on my website, which is mmdevoe.com. It's really hard because it turns out when you title a book Book and Baby, it's dumb. you can't search it. It comes up like 400th because of everybody writing about books and everybody else writing baby books. And so Google doesn't put things in order or use ampersands. Whatever. Anyway, I'm here to help. So you let me know what you want to talk about.
All right. I hope at some point you can start hearing what I'm saying, or else it's going to be awesome.
It's good. We're here.
We're meshed now.
Energy.
Yes. I told my partner, she's an author, a writer as well, and I told her the description of Femme Kafka, and her immediate reaction was just intense jealousy. She just was like, I want to be Femme Kafka. And I like kind of had to give her like you can do what you want to do. You need to be your version of it. But I think that was she loved that description. I also love just this vision of like driving around a neighborhood and seeing all the writers' kids just on the step, just like outside, just kind of like waiting for mom and dad to finish their.
We used to sell onesies that said, for babies, onesies that said, I'm working on a memoir.
Oh, that's great. That's fantastic. So yeah, we're kind of doing a little series here. A lot of our users, we launched for NaNoWriMo. So a lot of our users were doing NaNoWriMo. They now, are approaching the end of it, and they are either, close to a rough draft or perhaps approaching a rough draft, probably a variety of, word counts at this point, but they're probably starting to think about, what do I do with this big old mass of word count that I've been accumulating over the month? Because as we know, a rough draft is not the same thing as a manuscript that you can try to get published. So we want to talk a little bit today about what they can do on their own. Next week, we're going to be speaking with a writer and their developmental editor. And then the week after that, we're going to have an agent. So this one is kind of more like the self-starter, self-directed stuff. And I think that probably starts with revising it, on your own. And as someone who generally likes shorter things, like short stories and scripts, for me, the fundamental, aspect of a book, of a novel, is it's so dang long. So I kind of want to start with, how do you even approach revisions? Are you revising by chapter as you go? Are you waiting kind of until the end? Why don't we start, Danica? How do you approach your revisions? At what point do you start thinking about revising?
Well, some context here. I have been, and I was, a technical ghostwriter for over 20 years. So writing is what I've done for now. Well, yeah, so over almost 25 years now. So my process is not going to be the same as someone who's jumping into NaNoWriMo for the first, second, or even third time, because I've literally written millions of words. I edit as I go. It's intuitive. That doesn't mean that when I get to the end of my story, it's done. I tend to approach revisions starting at the big picture. So once I've written the whole story, I typically will get a couple of trusted readers to look at it and tell me what they see and what they don't see with a series of specific questions. I have been known to write less than likable heroines because they sometimes they just go against the grain a little bit too much. And so I ask questions like, can you actually root for my heroine to fall in love in this story? Or do I need to give her, a save the cat moment, kind of, like make her more likable? But my process is very much start at the big picture. Once it's done, get other people to give me feedback, so they'll see what I can't see. Mm-hmm. And then the deep revisions and the line by line stuff comes after it's sat for a little while. The revision process takes longer than the writing process for me.
When you say big picture, starting there, what do you mean by that? What are you looking at in that big picture?
I'm looking at goal, motivation, conflict, for instance. Do the characters have a reason to be like, because I write romance, it's very specific. There are definite beats that have to be hit, and and I write male, female. So are the hero and heroine on a journey that matches what reader expectations are for my genre? And so that's big picture. Their goals in inner motivation, outer goals. So their needs and their wants, are those clear, and do they make sense? Do their wounds make sense? Do the way they react in response to different things, the different troubles that the hero or the heroine puts on them? So that's the big picture stuff. It's it's definitely story related. Am I hitting all the right?
Yes. And I think I'm assuming, like, especially when you're talking about like characters' goals and wants, that's probably an evolving process. They may not be the same characters at the end that you were writing in chapter 1. So having to sort of match that up with who they become by the end of the book, and who you started with. Yeah,
exactly. And is their path believable? Like, books fail. I see stories failing when that path from where they were, who they were when they started, before they met the love of their life, to the end. If there isn't a natural progression that makes sense, and the reader can't see why somebody has changed, then the story needs strengthening, the character needs strengthening. So that's where I go.
Cool. And everyone, if you have any questions, again, please put them in the chat. As we go along, we can respond to them in the conversation or at the end. But can you jump in? Feel free to respond to anything that we've chatted about, but I'd also just kind of love to hear about how you start thinking about revisions, and when in the process you start thinking about them.
Sure. So I went to Columbia for my MFA, and that was very literary fiction. I read sci-fi for like interesting page-turny stuff as well as literary fiction. So I kind of have this, like, I'm a Gemini. So it's like, I like both. And I think they both have.
Oh dear.
Oh, I think we lost Em for a moment. Hopefully she'll come back. C. Borden, I see your question about the alpha beta readers. I want to get to that later. First, let's start talking about kind of the process that you can do on your own, and then moving in. Em, you're back. We lost you for a second.
I don't know what happened. I could hear myself perfectly.
It was our problem. It was everyone else's. Yeah. And I feel like you're
I'm gone. I'm here. I'm gone.
Yeah.
It's Kafka.
We don't want the Kafka in this meeting. Yeah. Can you put that female Kafka aside?
Away. Technology is wonderful. So I wanted to just say that no matter if you're writing literary fiction or genre fiction, because the goals are very different, but it's really important to get that first read as a solid piece. Like, the first time you're done with your draft and you're like, my draft is done, put it away for a day or two. Depends on how long it takes for you to sort of get out of editing, get into editing head, out of creating head, and then read the whole thing through. And even better if you can read it out loud. Our authors frequently will use voice recognition. Like, you can switch on for learning disability people, you can switch on a reader so that it reads it to you out loud, and that will let you hear it without your own voice influencing the fact that it's being read to you. That's one way to get around the fact that not everybody has a space where they can actually read out loud. So you can like plug it in your ear and just have the document read out loud to you by the British dude or the, you know.
I think that's really interesting, because I don't know, people tend to think of novel writing as this sort of silent, solitary affair where you're in your tower and it's just, you know, with the fire or the candlelight or something, and maybe a raven's. Maybe this is just my image of it, but
I like it. I like the ravens.
Yeah, there is you know, it's a verbal art form. Since it is words, you are playing with language and dialogue. So that's interesting, hearing it aloud. That's something that's very common, obviously, in the screenwriting world, where you can do table reads and you have actors and everything, and especially in comedies, that's a very popular form. But I also liked what you were saying about setting it aside, because it does kind of feel like you're a different person at different parts of the writing process. Like when you're in it, it's so close that it can be hard to see what's wrong, or, you know, what needs to be worked on. But if you give yourself some of that space, then it starts to become a separate document that maybe isn't so close to you. Danica, do you ever? Oh, sorry. No, Em, please.
I was just going to say that some of our people read it aloud to somebody, because having the connection to the reader, like reading it out loud to somebody, instantly will show you what is wrong with your piece. Like you can't even, you'll start reading a sentence and just be like, oh, I can't even read this to you, you know?
Sure.
So with a rough draft, if you have somebody who's very trusted or who is very patient, you can try that.
That sounds emotionally challenging too. Just like it's so vulnerable to just take your raw work and share it with someone in that capacity. Danica, do you listen to your work out loud?
I actually recommend and do the same thing. Definitely put it aside. In our community, I recommend a couple of weeks to get, because we forget our own stories, right? Mm-hmm. So, it allows us it allows us to realize where we've made assumptions, because we know our characters better than anybody. So, and yes, it's fascinating to listen. I typically don't listen though until it's like several passes along, because that's where I'll hear where I have clunky I tend to write probably the way I speak, which is in long sentences that have multiple phrases. And so it makes sense coming out of my hands. It makes sense as I'm reading it quietly because I have the right pauses. But when I hear it read, I can hear those sentences need to be shortened, turned into a couple of sentences, or I've doubled up a word, which I do. I don't understand how, but my fingers will double type words and they will skip words. So you hear that when you have someone else reading it. If I read it even out loud to myself, my brain just overlooks those errors. So I do that process at the end.
Interesting. Mm-hmm. So Em, after you've done your big read through, you've set it aside, how do you attack your revision? Where do you like to start?
So I think similar to Danica, the causality from one thing to another, to make sure that it all makes perfect sense, that there's no gaping character jumps, that suddenly a character was doing one thing one way and now it's doing something else. A lot of times, so I'm a pantser. I write as I go and I revise as I go, which can be chaos when you're writing something long. So having that long read through, the first thing I do is like, oh, this is out of time sequence. They were wearing a white shirt in this scene and now they're wearing pink. Like all that stuff jumps out. So I fix all of that. And then frequently I'll go to a reader and see what they have to say. Because I personally tend to write very clean drafts. And so giving it to a reader lets me see, and it's usually motivational not errors, but just, I know why the character is doing something, but a normal person might be like, why is the character doing that?
Right. No, I mean, we're the only ones in our own brains. And so once you get to that other perspective, you suddenly, all your flaws and assumptions and everything just become exposed for the world. I'm curious in terms of, you know, there are almost aspects that feel technical in like causality, you know, logic, flow, and then aspects that feel artistic, like the flow of your sentences and your word choice. Do you approach those separately? Does the artistic and style just sort of come as part of the other aspects, or is that a dedicated pass that you're doing to look at those things?
That's a great question. I believe I used to beat myself up because I write very vanilla or very like boring first drafts. They're clean, but so this is why, like, I kind of when I was saying I edit as I go, I'll write the first chapter and I'll get the staging done basically, and the dialogue is super easy for me. Setting is really hard for me, and I love plays on words. I love metaphors. I love to put the color in. I can never get that right out of the gate. So that's one of the very last things that goes in. I know, partly because it's not until like MM, I call it a discovery writer. I don't know I know my characters, but I don't know them really, really well until I've written to the end. And then I can go back and add in the flowery language, the metaphor that they would use. And so yes, it is a different pass and it is a full thing. I will actually use square brackets through my manuscript and say, insert clever line here. And I write funny, so the clever lines, I'm not always funny. The sex scenes as well, insert sex scene here. I'm not always in the mood to be writing about those things. So that is definitely at the very end. Those things, those square brackets get filled in for me.
Interesting.
This is my favorite thing about writers. You put two in a room and they have completely different ways at getting at the finished product. And I think that is fantastic because it means we're not all the same and not our books are going to be the same. I actually do like the polar opposite. I am all words, all cleverness, all the stuff. And I have to cut it. I have to okay, that's way too much metaphor. Let's have that. And we can take out 6 of these metaphors and just leave 1. I'm constantly stripping out the beauty and just trying to get to the story. Where's the story? So it's cool that we just we come at it from very different ways. And I think it really depends on, I'm going to say that your first revision is going to really depend on what your first draft looks like. My first draft is too long and too flowery. And Danica's is probably too spare and too empty. So I bet the people out there in viewer land all have different first drafts when they're done. Some of them, if they're not readable, if your grammar and your spelling is so bad that it's not readable to your first reader, you better fix that before you send it to a first reader. It really depends on what your first draft is. And I think it's a good idea to figure out how your first draft looks. What are your weaknesses and what are your strengths, right?
Interesting. Yeah, I've been writing a short story. I sort of wrote it, a draft or 2 of it over the summer and put it aside, and I picked it back up recently. And I had that sort of thing where I was reading these descriptions of the character and their thoughts, and it was just all so clever. And it was all just being so clever. And aren't I just a talented writer, just using my words so nicely? And it was just empty. There was no emotion behind it, And so that's sort of the revision process that I'm going through right now with this story, is stripping that away and just being what is the character's mindset right here? How can I explore this story through what they're feeling in these scenes, and trying to be led more that way instead of by showing how great I am as the writer. I feel like sometimes that is a challenge. There's a phrase, kill your darlings, where there's the parts that you love but don't belong in your story. So how do you balance yourself, I don't know, almost humbling yourself as the writer to let the story, do you ever find that where you kind of have to yourself recede and let the characters or the story take charge?
I needed to bleed more. I don't like, I am so hidden when I'm writing fiction. I'm like, writing a fiction, it's so fiction, it's so beautiful that I need to like part the hedge. Like I'm here, you know, like yeah.
And I'm just very different. I come from a technical writer background, and it took me so long to find my own voice. As a ghostwriter for over 20 years, I can easily morph into any corporation's voice, or they were all nonprofit organizations, but I can assume the voice of all these other people. It took me many 100,000 words before I was able to find my own voice. So I don't have that problem. I'm still, you know, first novel was published in 2000. What year are we? 2016. And I have a voice now, but it's not like you. I mean, that is what I aspire to, is to have so much voice that I have to cut some out. I'm still fighting to get my voice in.
Well, I don't know, that's my voice. That's a problem. It's like all that, like I said, the collection, it's like Black Mirror. Every single one feels like it's a different director. Like every single one is like a totally different setting, totally different everything. But in there's me. Like in there's that like, oh, she's quirky and odd. And
was the differentiation intentional as you wrote each story, or did they just take paths?
No, originally it was intentional. Like I was really exploring different voices and different almost attitudes of writing. Like some of them are very snarky and some of them are very like kind of trying to be very like straightforward. Most of it is a collection, so it was written over many years, and many of the stories are from very different periods of my writing style, if you will. So yeah, I don't know, it's fun.
That's interesting. So
I want to be Danica and have 800 novels.
If we could somehow merge the two screens and create the super writer between that technology, I think that would be fantastic. So a lot of our users right now, as I mentioned, NaNoWriMo is a very you mentioned pantsing, which is just kind of writing by the seat of your pants, just going for it. They probably have manuscripts that are just very rough right now. In some case, might need, before getting to the stylistic, things, or like major structural work. As they're figuring it out as they go, they're changing it. So when you have a piece of work that doesn't just need, character motivation work, you think, but like maybe some fundamental issues at the core of it, at the structure level, how do you approach that? Do you kind of create an outline and try to re-outline it, step away, or how do you approach major structural changes?
I have to get somebody else to read it and do points. Like most normal people are able to do this themselves. They'll just summarize it on a note card or on a thing, and I can't see it. Like I can't see the core without the language. And so I get somebody else to read it and give me like a thing that's like, here are the points. And then I'm like, oh, that's the problem. This is supposed to go before this. It would make so much more sense if this whole scene was just not there. It doesn't even matter. Like summarizing it. And I'm just going to plug your little ButterDocs thing that I test ran, because, oh my God, it is so easy to move these things around on the note card. Holy cow. Yeah. It's like, you're like changing the world, people.
That's really, yeah. I'll take advantage of that plug and say that board is that's natural product integration right there. The board, is fantastic structurally to be able to, because the digital kind of note cards, which we call blocks on the board, are linked to the section of your story. So if you rearrange them on the board, you can actually rearrange your entire story without having to like do massive cut and paste, and it's just really easy to see it.
For anybody who has tried to cut a chapter in a Word document and move it, this is transformative, people. Or Scrivener, God forbid, Scrivener. I mean, Scrivener's supposed to be able to do it, but you have to have a PhD in micromanaging. I don't know.
Agreed.
Danica, how do you approach big structural changes?
Depending on the book, well, I've only had 2 where I've really needed to do big structural changes. The first one, I hired a developmental editor, and I want to say developmental editors are fabulous, and I'm glad you're speaking to one. And it is my belief that, and I have learned this through experience and from actually talking to developmental editors, we often wait too long to hire our developmental editor. So I, with my very first novel, hired a developmental editor who said, this whole section, these 10,000 words, you don't need them in the story. What we do need is earlier in the story, we need this. So write some chapters here, take that chapter out. And, you know, after crying because you've just been told that the 10,000 words that you've worked so hard on have to go away, I realized, yes, she was right, 100% right. Another, more recently, I had a book, one of my novels in my series, and I got to the end of it. I had actually done structural changes while I was writing because I couldn't get the characters. Once, you know, I hit the middle, the characters' motivations weren't making sense. So I had to go back and rewrite the beginning, and I did that twice, the first third of the story. How do I do it? This is going to seem kind of meta, but it's not practical, but it's with a learner's mindset. It's with the mindset that there are no wasted words. A book takes as long as it takes to write. And sometimes a story is going to fight with me. And so I have to accept that I might write 30,000 words that aren't going to end up in the story, but they were 30,000 words that helped me find the story. So I think the most important part of my process is always coming back to, this is all okay. I haven't wasted time. I haven't wasted words. I'm getting a better story out of this. So that's.
Danica, I mean, there are so many things I want to like branch off of what you just said right now, but I want to talk about mindset as a reviser too. But I think what you just said is fantastic, because I think people sometimes get discouraged by something not working, not being right, or being the wrong idea. But so many times I feel like I found in my own writing that the right idea or the solution is almost 3 steps over from the bad thing that I have right now. Like it's everything is a potential path towards something else. And you might have this idea because there's something underneath it that you're getting at, and you've identified the problem, but not necessarily the solution yet. I don't know if in screenwriting we call that the note behind the note. Someone gives you a note that you hate, and you're like, no, that's wrong. But you're like, but why did they give you that note? There's something else there that I have to identify. I also just want to call out in the chat, I love Katie Phillips. She said her dad writes nonfiction, and he prints out his manuscript and literally with scissors cuts it up and rearranges it in order to find the structure, which is fantastic. And that there's just so many different ways that our minds work and see things that, yeah, I wanted to highlight.
I will tell you that when I was at Columbia, Michael Cunningham did that to one of my short stories, and it got published like a minute after I sent it out. Like, he cut it up. He was like, this is a great story, but you don't want to look at this, because he was cutting so much of the actual story out. He's like, you don't want to watch. He cut it up, and then he disappeared some of it, and then he rearranged the rest of it, and he's like, here you go. And I was like, oh, what did you do to my story? It's perfect. Like, it was cool.
Great. I'm looking for my scissors right now. I can't find them. But that's the secret weapon, I think, towards.
I can't imagine doing the whole thing though. That's a lot.
I want to touch on, Danica, you mentioned the word mindset, and I want to transition in a moment to talking about readers and getting feedback from people. But how is your mindset different when you're sort of in revision mode versus writing mode? Are you more charitable with yourself? Are you harsher with yourself? Are you looking for different things, or do you see a difference between those mindsets?
100%. Well, do I see a difference between the mindsets? In writing, it is, I try to be an explorer, I guess, right? Just be open to letting all the things come in. I as a discovery writer, I don't tell the story kind of comes to me through the characters. It sounds weird, but that's it. So when I'm writing, my mindset is accept what they're doing they may take me down a weird path. That weird path may be fabulous, it may be wrong, but it doesn't matter because they're telling the story. It's all good. So it's them. I'm focused in the mindset. I'm focused on just allowing. When it comes to the revisions, and specifically when it comes to getting feedback from beta readers or critique partners, I haven't had a critique partner in a while, but I used to work with critique partners. That is a different mindset because now I'm getting feedback that potentially can be received as, like, as MM was saying, like it can sometimes feel hard to hear. It can be hard to accept when somebody says, don't love it, whatever they might want to say. But the mindset there is, okay, the story isn't quite right yet. And it's just keeping this word yet in focus on it. It allows me to think this isn't bad. It isn't wrong. It's just not quite there yet. And that's the mindset. It's a single word that kind of changes how I feel about feedback that I don't want to see.
That's so good.
Yeah, I love that idea.
I think that both of the mindsets require trust, but the first one, I have to trust the story. I am giving over to whatever the story does, wherever it goes, what the characters want, and I'm curious, like, what's going to happen? Like, what are they going to do? How are they going to get out of this room? Like, I'm really interested in curious, but I trust that the story has a point and that it has an end, and I'm going to find it by just writing my way to it. And then when I'm in editing mode, I have to trust the reader's experience. I have to put myself as a reader of the story and trust that when they're telling me it's slow here, or I don't know if I like this character, does it need to be so mean, or whatever, like, or, you know, like, why is it so weird? And so I have to trust the reader, but I have to do that with a grain of salt, because not every reader is my perfect reader. And I think that you don't just give over entirely. You have an internal perfect reader, who's probably you, who's like has to be appeased, this perfect reader in your head. And some of your readers are going to actually mimic that perfect reader, and some of them are going to just not get you and just be like asking you to do things like use shorter words because they can't, you know, be bothered to look something up.
Yeah.
Like, no, look it
up. I love what you're bringing up. I love the not yet thing, the writing as a journey, because I feel, you know, that is, it's not only for the specific work, but I feel like that's writing as general, you know, in terms of being a writer itself as a journey, and each work on that journey is changing you, and you're developing as a writer and learning new things and trying new things. And so, which I think can also be very helpful as a buffer against failure in some senses, that if you write something and it doesn't get published, or it doesn't quite have the impact that you hoped, the sales you hoped, whatever, that if you felt you grew as a writer from that process, you know, and you expressed something, that there was value there, you know, that was separate from its commercial or, you know, industry success or anything like that. And I also love what you were saying about the curiosity, that what's next when you don't know. I think one of the terrifying and wonderful things about being a writer is when you sit down to a question that you haven't figured out yet, that there's there's a hole in your story, and it's scary because you're like, I have to solve this. And then once you do, that is delight. I feel, you know, that's the pure act of creation as a writer, when you're like, I sat down to nothing and I got up to something that I created. I think that's so fantastic. But I want to change over to the idea of readers now. You both have mentioned that several times as being really important in your process. And I was a little surprised. It seems like both of you really get that reading feedback pretty early in the process. Is that hard for you to share something that still feels rough, and, you know, you haven't made it as perfect as you can, and you're going to feel judged or anything by them? How do you kind of overcome the emotional obstacles towards sharing your work?
Good question.
Yeah. I like reader feedback. Like it jazzes me to get reader feedback because the whole point of writing to me is communicating. And so getting read by even just by one person is such a joy to me. I'm like, somebody read, it's like writing a letter and somebody read it. Like, it's nice. So I guess I'm okay with it. And I mean, I was an actor before I was a writer, so rejection is just like, whatever. I don't care.
Just choosing all the rejection career paths. Yeah.
You don't like me because of whatever. That's fine. You don't have to like me.
I have a different feeling. I used to have a critique group. I was in a critique group for a number of years, and at that point, I was writing creative nonfiction, and the other three were writing romance. And at a certain point, they just stopped reading my stuff. Like, we'd get to our critique groups, and they'd be like, "Oh, I didn't read yours," because they weren't interested. And it taught me something really important. They were friends. They're still friends. But getting the right reader makes the feedback easy to take. When you have the wrong reader, it's terrible. And like MM just mentioned, like, not everyone is going to love our stuff. So for me, it has been a process of finding the right people to read what I have at those early stages. And I don't feel afraid because I trust them. I think the theme is pretty, trust those readers. Friends, family, they are not the right people to read. I believe, for me and my experience, what has worked best is finding readers who both read the subgenre of romance that I write and also write it, because they have, first of all, they're readers of it, so they know what the expectations are within that genre. And as writers, they have a sensitivity that non-writers often don't have. And so they know what words to use to not be harmful. And that's really important, finding people who have that kind of a skill.
And how did you find that microcosm of perfect readers? I'm impressed.
Well, I had a live RWA. So there was an in-person group that used to meet in Vancouver, where I'm from. But it has been a process of, since publishing, I had beta readers who were just fantastic and would give me feedback that really resonated. And so they became more important in my process. Like, I would give them things earlier than a beta read. And also, here's the thing you do. You start a community and you just invite the people in who really work well together. So really finding online communities is an excellent way. But it's not being afraid to say we don't work well together. I think I love my age now because I'm not afraid to say I really like you, but this isn't going to work with readers, with beta readers, with people who offer. So
I feel like that's advice that can probably be applied to many aspects of your life,
everything,
not just writing. Em, how do you find readers? What do you look for in a reader?
So I've had my readers for a very long time because I had them since they're like old friends who are avid readers, and they read across many genres, and they know me, so they know my voice, and they know when I'm being like too fictiony and fake and not myself. And and they call me on it. And then I have a writers group. So a lot of my writers came from just knowing them for a long time. I have a subset that are from my grad school that are just like super pros and know what to do. And then I have some that are from this awesome fiction writing group that I was in that just very recently disbanded, and I already miss them. But they were all like super genre writers. Like, they're very, very successful. Most of them have awards, like top awards, but they are so plot driven that it just drags me in the wake. Like, I cannot stop to describe a flower. They're like, come on, what is happening next? Like, let's go. And it's good for me. I love them.
That's fantastic. I love mentioning the community because I'm, in screenwriting, it can be sometimes a little easier because like I'm in Los Angeles where there is just a lot of us, and it's easier to meet. But Danica, you mentioned online communities, and there are ways to find people. One of the things I found with the writers group is that actually giving feedback helps me as much as getting it, in the sense that if I'm just reading something for pleasure, I'm not necessarily thinking about it critically. I'm trying to enjoy it, or learn from it or whatever. But if I'm reading someone else's work to give them feedback on it, I'm thinking about it in a way that is critical, that I can read it in a way that I can't read my own work, in the sense that when I'm reading other people's, I feel like you learn so much through reading other people's writing and giving them feedback on their writing. And you can see issues in other people's writing that you'll never see in your own writing. So it's so valuable, in so many different.
Or it echoes. You see it in somebody else's and you go, oh, damn, I did that.
I read
this.
no. Danica, you mentioned earlier, I think, maybe specific questions. So how are you, when you're approaching readers, you're asking them for specific things? I
am. So when I get to the end of a draft, and through having books that have been published that get, 1 and 2 star reviews, I know I am learning where I can be stronger in my writing, or where my writing might not work very well. And so when I go to beta readers, I have a series of questions that I'm asking them. There are some of them, and of course, I'm not going to think of the top of my head. Some of them are around likability, believability and likability of the characters, really important in romance, at least, probably in most genres. But then I will ask questions that are specific to the story, where I have concerns, because I'll get to the end of a story and think, did that particular scene work? Do you understand what was going on there? So, is my subtext clear enough for the reader to get, or am I just too much, is it too much in my head? So I think it's really important. There is a service that you can, I can't remember the name of it, but for my last novel, I paid to have some beta readers. I thought, I'm going to give this a shot and see what people who get paid to beta read will give me. And I know other folks who have used it and gotten really great results. They give you a series of questions that they recommend you can ask the beta readers. I chose to use my own questions, and some of the questions I realized getting that feedback from those folks weren't very well phrased. So I think it's a really important thing to learn how to phrase questions, which questions to ask your beta readers. Don't just give them a book and say, do you like it? Or, how many stars would you give this? You really want to get specific, and it's very, very valuable to figure out.
How do you approach getting feedback? Are you asking specific questions, or?
It depends on the piece. Some of the longer pieces, I will say, can you tick it off if it gets boring? If I'm just off in my description head, can you just make a little tick mark next to that area? And sometimes I just let them go, and I'm but I'm very selective on my readers. So I will ask a different reader for a different thing from the first reader. I tend to have, I probably have 4 or 5 people read it before I try to send it out.
Is that because you know their strength as a reader?
Yeah.
Asking them specific different things? Interesting. Yeah. Cool. Well, we're kind of coming to the end here, but I wanted just to touch a little bit on publishing, just because we have both of you and a little bit of your experience. There are so many different paths there, self-publishing, industry publishing. You used a term in an email to be hybrid publishing and traditional publishing. As a writer, I don't think we have time to get into the nitty gritty, but how do you think of what approach you should take? Is there aspects about yourself as a writer, your own personality or skills that impact which path you should pursue?
I mean, some of it is how soon do you want it to get to the market? Because traditional publishing, in best case scenario, it's at least a year before anybody's going to see this book. And it's a lot, and it's like day job levels of work. Like it is so much work to go through traditional publishing. So if you are happy with just uploading what you have and you don't care, then, you know, maybe self-publishing is what you want, because you can do that instantly. Hybrid publishing is just where you hire a company to do a lot of the connecting you to people work. Like they connect you to a cover designer, they connect you to they figure out how to get the ISBN number. You don't have to look it up on a blog. Like everything, like all the details of publishing, like a lot of the hybrids, I call them hybrids. They probably have a totally new name now, but but I'm old, so I use old terminology. But there are, it's sort of self-publishing, but all the sort of book part is done by professionals. And there's hundreds of companies that do that now. And a lot of the indie publishers function that way and call themselves indie publishers, not hybrid publishers. So it really depends. You have to just look it up.
I think, I mean, this isn't answering your question, but just to clarify that a hybrid author is an author who has a trad book, has trad books, and who indie publishes. So that would be a hybrid author. And the hybrid publishers, are kind of somewhere half between the vanity press, which are like, do vanity press. And
so vanity press is pay to play. You give them money and they'll publish your book in a right.
Yeah, but then they take rights, and there's a whole, like, they typically pretend they act like a publisher, but you don't get the benefits of an actual like big five or affiliated with one of the big five publishers or some of the legit small press. But I wanted to be trad published for the credibility when I first started, and I pitched agents for over a year. I ultimately got some requests for full and partial manuscripts, but the last one was when an agent said, "Don't pitch anymore, we're really serious about this," and then turned me down after several months of waiting, I thought, well, this is just silly. So ultimately, I also had a deadline. I wanted to be published by the time I was 50. That was kind of like, this has been going on since I was 40. It's time. So I indie published, and I did kind of the hybrid approach that first time, and I paid somebody to do a lot of all the publishing pieces for me. But if you're going to be publishing, if you want to go indie and you're planning to publish more than one book or a series because you want to turn this into a career, which comes back to, what are your goals? What are your goals when you're publishing your book? How many books do you think you're going to publish? Those are the kind of questions I would ask of oneself to determine, should I go trad? Should I go indie? Should I hire a hybrid publisher, or should I learn these things myself? And do I need to start with this book of my heart that I've been working on forever? Or should I start with something that your first book probably isn't going to get a lot of traction? You're not going to know how to do ads yet. So take a risk, learn all the skills with your first book. Don't make it the one of your heart that has to be, the one that, shines the light on you. Save that one until you've figured out the industry a little bit, would be my recommendation.
Awesome. Well, I think we have run out of time. I want to thank you both so much for joining. There was such a fantastic conversation. So much wisdom being shared here. So MM and Danica, thank you so much for joining us. And I think Rob's going to come back on just for a few announcements to end. But yeah, we'll see you. See you, Danica.
Thank you.
Rob, you're muted, which is every episode. I have to say that at least once.
We're going to get the ticker. We're going to add a ticker to a ticker graphic at some point to how many times I'm muted. Again, I just wanted to say thank you to MM and to Danica. These are friends of the show, friends of ButterDocs. They've been working with us for months, giving us feedback, connecting us to people. It's been really great working with you two. And this was a great discussion. I think I judge a live stream based on how productive I am with the other work I'm trying to do during the live stream. And I was not productive at all. So I watched you guys the whole time. So that was perfect. That's a good judge for me. So appreciate it. Hope to have you back on ButterDocs Live or other things that we do soon.
Definitely. All right, guys. Bye. I'm gonna take you guys off stage. Thank you so much. All right, Rob, you want to close us out?
Yeah, I just wanted to call out a few things. One, to the repeat people that keep coming to these things, thank you so much. Like, we're to be completely transparent, we're just kicking these things off. We're seeing how it goes. We're learning a lot in the process. We're figuring out as a company the type of content we want to do and things like that. And it's been fun learning alongside Micah here on how to produce this show. So we want to kind of celebrate you two, you guys, and reward you. So that's why we doubled the amount of entries today or more than doubled. We're giving out 50 entries to our NaNoWriMo sweepstakes to the folks that came today. Just go to ButterDocs.com/NaNoWriMo, put in chaos to clarity, no space. We'll give you 50 entries for that. And then come next week, it's going to be a big one. We'll give at least 50, maybe even up it beyond that, because it'll be the last day that you can earn entries. Will be December 6th. We are going to be picking our winners of the sweepstakes. So come there. So, in case you win, you don't have to be there. If you win, we'll notify you. It'll just be more fun and dramatic if you're there, and maybe we can pull you on stage, or everyone can applaud you or what have you. So come to that event. It's also going to be a good event. It's going to be we're bringing in a developmental editor and writer's coach with one of her author clients. So they're going to talk about the relationship between the editor and the author, and how to work with the developmental editor, and really just get your draft to that next point, get it closer to getting it published, get it polished. So going to be a great event. Come to that one, and we'll see who wins the $1,200 Airbnb gift card. The Airbnb, Apple AirPods Max, we're going to give out 3 of those. We're going to give out $50 Amazon gift cards. So excited to have you for that. And then the other thing I'd throw out there is we'd love to have more of you guys on the show. So if you have a topic that you like to talk about, maybe you're an author, you want to talk about your writing process, you're an editor, heck, you want to replace me on ButterDocs Live or do another show with ButterDocs on ButterDocs Plus, talk to me, rob@butterdocs.com. Just throwing it out there. And that's how small we are right now. Just here's my email address. So get in contact. I'd love to chat with you about it.
Yes. Awesome. All right. Well, hey, everyone. Yeah, thank you so much for coming. Love the feedback. Love to see familiar names in the chat. It's really encouraging. And congratulations on NaNoWriMo, and good luck on your last few days. But, good luck beyond that, because, NaNoWriMo is only the start or the continuation, depending on where you started. So, best of luck. And we really want these kind of next 3 weeks just be helpful in your process. So I think from both of us, we're going to say sayonara, and hopefully see you next week. Bye, everyone.